Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Israel, and I'm the Executive Director of the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce based in Tel Aviv. Aviv, do you want to do the spotlight, Aviva? For those who don't know, the Chamber is an independent, non-profit organisation, and we help Australian corporations gain a competitive edge through our unique access to the dynamic Israeli high-tech ecosystem. We're dedicated to promoting bilateral trade and relations. And pre-corona, we were hosting 50 delegations per annum, showing Australian executives the best Israel has to offer in terms of innovation across a wide range of industry sectors. During the corona era, we of course have gone virtual and not only conducting a range of Zooms and webinars like today, but do professional technology scouting, helping Australian executives keep their finger on the pulse with a fast evolving Israeli tech scene. The Chamber is very excited about today's webinar. It is our first joint project with AISA, Australian Information Security Association. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank their chairman, Damien Manuel, and of course, Megan, for all their work in helping putting this together. For those not familiar with the Israeli high-tech scene, I'd like to share a few things for context. For the past 20 years, Israel has been branded the startup nation, but really that is old news. Yes, we have more startups per capita than anywhere else in the world, but we need to find another name. Reason being, with less than 0.1% of the world's population, Israel is home to 10% of the world's unicorns. That is, privately held companies valued at $1 billion US and more. And it is worth noting that 20% of Israeli unicorns are cyber related. And just under half of these cybersecurity unicorns were created during the first half of this year. Another interesting factor to note is the venture capital industry, which is growing by the day in leaps and bounds. In 2020, we had a record year of $9.9 billion invested by Israeli VCs. In 2021, this figure is expected to go well over $20 billion US, which is more or less equivalent to the same amount being invested in the whole of Europe. Specifically back to cyber, 40% of all private investments globally are happening in Israel. Our two guest speakers today are from world-leading cyber companies headquartered in Israel. Whilst they will formally be introduced shortly, I'd like to say just a couple of words about each of them. Hisole, a part of a unique VC called Teammate, which are essentially a company building think tank venture group. And then CyberSecSkill are doing amazing work through their advanced security algorithms for automatically monitoring the dark web. With that, it is my pleasure to hand over to Damien Manuel, Chairman of AISA, to moderate today's session. Thank you and shalom.
Thank you, Paul. I'm Damien Manuel. I'm going to be your MC for the session. So thank you for joining. Today, we're talking about cyber headaches in 2022 and beyond, predictions and solutions. I'd like to introduce the first speaker that we've got, which is Elad Lavie, co-founder and CTO of CyberSecSkill. CyberSecSkill is a new breed of agile threat intelligence solutions, providing security teams with the investigative capabilities and actionable insights needed to prevent data breaches, fight cybercrime, assess vulnerabilities, and amplify incident response in real time. And a reminder to all the guests who are connecting and joined us for this session, please don't forget, if you've got any questions during the session, put them into the chat field and we'll try to get to those questions throughout this event. Elad, over to you.
Thank you, Damien. Okay, I'll share my screen. Okay, good afternoon all. Thank you for joining. Okay, so today we talk about the autonomous cyber threat intelligence. Okay, originally many vendors out there that dealt with threat intelligence started in a manual approach. This is the easy way. That means that they had a team of analysts that grabbed their hand in different places in the deep and dark web in order to extract insight that the outcome that usually was a generic report about different topics such as the tool, industries, and more. Over the years, many of the vendors started to develop some kind of automation to ease the process of creating valuable intelligence. But in fact, actually, most of them still keep a large set of the activities still doing in a manual way, and still hold a team of professionals who still generate most of the intelligent pieces in a manual fashion. If we look at the intelligent process, there are three main phases. We have the first step is the collection, to collect data and to extract unstructured data from the deep and dark web and other relevant sources. We have the analysis to separate the wheat from the chaff, leveraging different algorithm, NLP, machine learning, and more. And we have the last phase, is the digestion, using the intelligence in different use cases. Actually, the two steps is more the challenging stuff. In the collection, when we collect data from different sources, the site, the admin in the site doesn't want us to collect the data, and they put some obstacle to prevent automatically collection. We of course know how to overcome most of it. And the second step is the analysis, and we will talk. There are many challenges in the analysis phase, and we will talk it in a minute. So the collection from valuable sources is the base of intelligence system. Valuable sources could include interaction of cyber criminals, sharing tools, techniques and procedures. Other sources include leaked data, such as source code, leaked credential, and other personal information. And threat actors today work on multiple platforms, such as the Tor network, Telegram, Discord, and more. We perform an exercise to see what's happening in the deep and dark web. Again, to see because there is a lot of activities out there. So here is a very nice example of what's happening in a minute. So basically, every minute, 170 posts are created in the deep and dark web sources, which is every 2 seconds, 2 posts. Every 2 seconds, someone offer to sell and buy something. Almost every minute, a CVE is mentioned. Every minute, 5 suspicious IP are shared. That about 50,000 IPs a week. And lastly, every minute, more than 600 credit cards are offered for sales, which is almost a million a day. So obviously, it's a manual approach cannot handle such amount of data. When we look at the analysis phase, we are aiming to answer an intelligent question, or better, to build a complete intelligence picture. To achieve that, many cases we are trying to understand the nature of the attack and analyzing the threat actor in order to assess the risk. The typical questions we ask are, who is the threat actor, the targeting, and what is being targeted, how does he plan to do it, what is modus operandi, and when will the attack take place? To gain more context, we need preliminary knowledge on who is playing in our playground. It could be both black hat attacker or white attacker. It could be financial fraudster or law enforcement, or it could be malware users or security professionals. Okay, both the good guy and the bad guys operate in the same place. Different threat actors have different skills and sophistication, and use different resources to conduct an attack. The level of sophistication is usually correlate with the reward and the damage that the attack can cause. In the lower level, we have the script kiddies that mainly do that for the excitement. And in the upper level, we have a well-organized crime or state-sponsor attacker that leverage APTs. There are different threat types used by different threat actors. Again, there is correlation between the complexity of the threat to the reward that can gain from it. Each threat type can be executed using a set of tools. Some of them you can download for free, and other like zero-day exploit, you can purchase for the lowest prices, $50,000 US. As we have seen, there are many aspects when analyzing data from the deep and dark web. Now let's see the main challenges when we automate the analysis phase, and mainly around when I talk, this example is more on the NLP, natural language processing algorithm. So when we are talking about threat intelligence, the threat occurs from different regions worldwide. Each region brings a different language with different culture, and each language brings new complexity when we train it for the cyber domain. The next challenge is the unique lingo that's used in the deep and dark web, and need to be familiar beforehand. For example, here, we see 3 words here. We see logs, fools, dumps, and an untrained person or system could understand. For example, here in the bank logs, meaning bank logins in an online banking site, fools is a full credit card information, including address and social security number or ID. Dumps is the full data from the magnetic stripes on the credit card. All those lingos from different languages need to be trained. When we try to apply well-trained text analysis algorithm on our data, it usually fails with the unsatisfied result. The reason behind it is that many algorithms, common algorithms that are available are trained on an article that is well written by a single author. In the example here, we see a long discussion with many contributors. Each contributor has different skills and style, and the texts occasionally include errors. This make it very difficult for analysis. To summarize, we work to develop advanced algorithms on how to reach and challenging data in order to develop the next generation threat intelligence platform that will be able to extract highly valuable insights. Here in the example, in this text, the goal is to extract the event information of an attack, which include the targeted organization, which is Yandex, the tool and techniques, which is DDoS attack used by the Maris botnet, and the date of the attack. I will end with a short brief about Cyber Sigil. So we saw at Cyber Sigil from the inception adopted the fully automated approach. Our threat intelligence solution is used by many customers worldwide, including top enterprises across a range of industries such as financial institutions, telecom, energy, as well as MSSPs and governmental agencies. We have offices in Israel, US, UK, and APAC. Our key advantages are our fully automated approach, which is allowed to extract valuable intelligence in a much faster way, and our coverage from how to reach deep and dark web sources. Our solution includes these 3 components that help organizations to protect against different cyber threats. The dark web can strengthen the SIEM SOAR platform, the Polar can help with detection of cyber threat, and the dynamic vulnerability exploit score can help with prioritization of CVEs. With that, I would like to thank you for listening.
Thank you, Elad. That was fantastic. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. Just a reminder to all the participants, don't forget to type into the chat box if you've got any questions that you'd like answered during this session. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, which is Yuki Arbel, VP Product Management from Hysolate. Hysolate enables organizations to isolate risky and sensitive activities on users' endpoints with a local workspace that isolates applications and data, reinventing how an isolated virtual environment is instantly deployed on a user's device and remotely managed from the cloud. Yuki, over to you.
Thank you, Damien. Just a second, I will share my screen. Good. Okay, so thank you for this excellent background about Highsolate. As mentioned, my name is Yuki Arbel. I'm the VP of Product for Highsolate. We're a startup company founded 5 years ago, and we're focusing on the endpoint space. I will talk to you about how you can use Highsolate to secure enterprise access by extending zero trust to the endpoint. Let's start maybe with some brief background about the problem domain. Endpoints, namely PCs and machines used to access, used by the user to access data, are the prime gateway for attackers to reach to organizations. Statistics, and they have been consistent for the past 20 years, say that in 70% of attacks, an endpoint is involved, which leads to no surprise that security teams are focused and are investing significant resources in protecting endpoints. If you look at any organizational PC, you will always find a security software installed. Now it's called an EPP, an Endpoint Protection Platform, or an EDR. Previously, it was called simply antivirus, but security organizations don't stop there, and they're taking a conservative approach. They do not let their users do anything that might jeopardize the organizational assets. In a recent survey that we conducted together with Team8, we asked CISOs what do they do in order to make sure that threats don't get into organizations. 62% of respondents restrict web browsing of their employees. A slightly higher proportion, 70%, install restrict the installation of third-party applications. And while those two measures actually for sure impact productivity by the users, still those security teams do not feel they can trust the endpoints that they give their employees. In recent years, there has been a trend that is called zero trust. Zero trust is the new paradigm for accessing sensitive resources. And it's, if for those of you unfamiliar, this is about requiring continuous identification based on the resources that are being accessed. In the past, we've had what's called perimeter-based security, where an employee would get access to organizational resources based on the fact that he's simply connected to some kind of an organizational network or connected through a VPN. Luckily, we've had zero trust introduced, which allowed us to adapt to the hybrid work model that most of us have been getting familiar with during the past 2 years with COVID around. But as prevalent as this access architecture might be, there are still gaps to make it complete. One of these gaps is the ability to establish trust over the last mile of access, which is the user's PC, the user's device. And this is where Highsolate steps into the game. We are focusing on establishing trust on this last mile of user access. And if to put it in a very simple sentence, Highsolate provides a complete SaaS, software as a service offering, that boosts trust by creating local isolated workspaces on user endpoints, doing it in minutes and managing those endpoints from the cloud. And the graphics below illustrates the concept in the best way. Imagine that the user has his own PC, his own machine. He downloads a lightweight installer, and within minutes he installs Highsolate on his machine. What happens then is that Highsolate uses virtualization technology to simply split the user endpoint, into two completely isolated environments. There's one environment which is a day-to-day environment for users' day-to-day activity. Imagine email, ordinary web browsing, maybe access to Office applications, and then an isolated, hardened, and secure environment to access sensitive systems and data. Everything that is related to the isolated environment is controlled through the Isolate management console that is running in the cloud. Now, for the more technical users or audience, let's talk a little bit about how Isolate changes the paradigm of access. So what I'm showing here in this simple diagram, it's the access architecture before Isolate is being introduced. On the left-hand side, we see the endpoint, the user that is accessing the data. And on the right-hand side, we see the corporate data center or cloud where sensitive resources are being accessed. So in the existing architecture, a user does whatever he does with the same endpoint. So imagine that he also accesses ordinary websites. He does his email, he could receive malicious files, and at the same time, he's able to access very sensitive corporate resources, things that could be related to IT, to HR, or to finance. And this inherently mixed usage could introduce threats that are coming from applications with the higher risk profile. They can introduce them to the more sensitive corporate assets. What Isolate does focuses on what we see on the left, and Isolate simply splits this endpoint, and it allows users to avoid mixed usage. So while the day-to-day usage is done in the corporate operating system, and so does any threat that is being introduced, it's contained over there, and access to secure applications is being done from the Isolate workspace where nothing risky could be introduced. Now, next, let's talk a little bit about user experience. The access architecture that I just discussed, it's not something that is designated for IT only or for developers. Because it's introduced across the organization, it should be available to HR people, to finance people, to operations people. And hence, the use of this architecture should be seamless and should be easily introducible to also non-technical audience, anyone that could use a regular operating system. So this is how it looks like in reality, right? You have your own, your day-to-day environment where you do your day-to-day stuff. You can browse the web, do email, maybe do some online meetings. But if you need to access your sensitive resources, what you need to do is simply use a simple keyboard shortcut or click a link on your desktop, and then you switch to Isolate, which appears just as an additional desktop, but it's actually a completely isolated operating system. Imagine a different PC from a security architecture perspective. You could do whatever you need to do from a sensitive access perspective there. And if you need to switch back, you simply click a keyboard shortcut, and then you've switched back to your regular environment and you continue doing your day-to-day job. So this was the user experience. Now, let's give you a bit of an overview of the technology behind what Isolate does. Isolate has 3 pillars of technology. The first pillar is security. It's here in the middle, which extends beyond the isolation that is provided by the underlying virtualization technology. We're introducing a number of additional security measures that allow organizations to protect against attackers. The second one is manageability, which is critical for taking such technology and introducing it at scale into organizations with thousands and tens of thousands of people. And finally, last but not least, there is user experience, which allows any user, regardless of how technical this user might be, to easily use Isolate. Now, a minute before last, let's talk about the use cases that we're focusing on. We are targeting two populations. The first populations are corporate employees that need to access sensitive resources. This could be anyone. It could be data, it could be resources that are located in a data center or in the cloud, and everything is, of course, in addition to their day-to-day work. In such a case, Isolate will be deployed on their corporate laptops, typically through some standard corporate software delivery systems such as SCCM, Intune, or something similar. The second population that we're targeting is third parties that need to access corporate assets from their machines, from their own machines, which the organization does not know. In such a scenario, those third parties would be requested to download Isolate and install it on their machines, and then they could use Isolate to access those sensitive corporate resources safely, regardless of what they have on their own machine. Finally, one last thing before we conclude, we recently launched a free offering that allows anyone to get a feeling of how Isolate looks like, and actually also benefit from some of the technology we're providing. It's not the full-fledged enterprise version, and it does not include manageability, but anyone could simply go to the Isolate homepage and download Isolate free to his machine. And this would allow anyone to leverage Isolate Workspace to access his sensitive resources in isolation and protect them from any threat that could be found on their machines. Thank you. Damien, back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. That was great, Yuki. Now we're going to open up for questions. So to the audience, if you've got questions, please type them into the Q&A or into the chat box, and we'll start to ask questions of both Elad and Yuki. Elad, I've got a couple of questions to sort of start off with you. Would a fully automated threat intelligence solution replace a human analyst in the near future?
Yeah, so basically, of course, we're aiming to build a solution that that help people, but actually, in the new future, we do not see that machines can really replace a human analyst. We are not there yet. But with that, actually, the best is to work with both. Human, of course, leverage a system as much as we can to produce better intelligence.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'll come back to you because I've got a question for Yuki. Why can't I just start a VM on my endpoint to achieve the same sort of isolation as you described?
Right, so that's an excellent question. And from a technology perspective, there is nothing. This is fundamentally different. However, you will be lacking three aspects that we discussed. The first one, again, is security. While virtualization does provide you with some level of isolation, Isolate provides additional technology capabilities such as a non-persistent virtual machine, which is resilient to threats. We're adding protection to key logging, to screenshots. We have controls of the ability to copy stuff across the environment and other security controls. From a manageability perspective, you will be lacking the ability to deploy and manage at an organizational scale, to be able to control the policies, to update the software. And finally, from a usability perspective, we're not talking about necessarily about a technical audience. So ability to provide streamlined workflows, like to automatically redirect activities across environments, is something that we also provide, and this is something that you will be missing if you're installing a virtual machine.
I can see that the Isolate product is going to be something that would even be fantastic for consumers, because whenever I talk to people and they say, how do I protect myself on my PC? For me personally, I install a virtual machine and do all my banking and secure applications through that. So, really looking forward to the Isolate sort of product potentially going into the consumer market. There's a question from Lawrence for Isolate, which is, if a corporate endpoint is communicating with an unprotected PC, example, an end customer, how does Isolate defend or protect the Isolate bubble?
So if a corporate endpoint communicates with an unprotected environment, then what is expected to be done is that this high risk profile activity would be done from the high risk environment within Isolate, the same environment that is used to access email and to do other risky stuff, while the environment that is designated for accessing sensitive resources is still remains protected and isolated, right? So we're rather than addressing a threat on its own, we're providing a secure by design architecture where risky activities are separated from sensitive activities.
Fantastic, thanks, Yuki. Elad, we've got a question for you, which is asked by Jen. When can automation come in to reduce the human touch? Like, when's it best to use automation and orchestration from that perspective?
Yeah, so as we've seen in the presentation, basically, we have different steps. The first step, of course, in the collection, because we need to handle a large set of data from varieties of sources, as I mentioned, deep and dark web and other relevant sources. So this is one aspect to automate the process and to bring all this data. And the next step is the analysis phase. In that, we know to extract insight from these data and extract intelligence. And again, there is a lot of things that you can do, varieties, algorithm, and natural language processing to extract entities and look for threat in the data, and other graph algorithm to find the connection and the relationship between threat actors and other means.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got another question, which is, how can a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer or a Chief Security Officer, calculate the return on investment of using a threat intelligence service?
Yeah, this is a good question. Actually, when we're talking in the cyberspace and the threat intelligence space, we're talking about basically when we're looking about ROI, we look about the risk model. Basically, there is a potential damage that can cause by a cyber attack in one hand, and usually there are some number in the market. It could be for organization millions. The damage could be millions a year. Actually, recently there was an example in Israel. Some insurance company got hacked by a ransomware group, and only recently only the fine was more than $3 million. So the damage, this is only the fine. There is a lot of other damages. The reputational damage can cause by cyber attack. So this is the one aspect of course, we look at the damage, and the other hand, we look at the probability that we can help and reduce the risk by leveraging threat intelligence.
Thank you. And I've got another sort of question for you as well. Are all threat intelligence services the same, and what makes them different? So how would you sort of rank or rate threat intelligence services, particularly if you're communicating with a board member, for example, who may not be sort of highly technical? How do you convince them that they are not all the same, and that there are certain ones that you should be sort of working with?
Yes, so this is a bit tricky, of course, but the idea is, again, when we talk again about threat intelligence, we need, of course, a good coverage in different places. When you really can find and extract and look for extract the risk and see the risk. So this is the one aspect to understand and the coverage of the threat intelligence provider. And the other one is what I'm able to provide, in what use cases I can support you. Of course, the basic one is to detect cyber threats, but there are other use cases like they help you to prioritize different security activities, like prioritize the patching, handle vulnerabilities, and others.
Excellent, thank you. There's a question from Ralph for both of you, and Yuki, if you wanted to go first, and then Elad, which was just wondering whether there are any plans to have your products on a common criteria, EAL, the US federal RAMP or the Australian IRAP program, so that it can be easily consumed by government agencies.
So maybe I can go. I can go first. So what we're trying to do is initially to provide our products to the broad-based commercial community, because we know those to get regulatory approval, this is something that could take a lot of time. And we believe our technology is not only does not only provide value to top-notch secure environments, but also to the occasional enterprise. So this is what we're focusing on right now. But definitely, we're taking a step towards certification. We're starting with, let's say, the more standard ISO and SOC 2 certifications that give comfort to any organization that wants to make sure that we are compliant. But definitely, we will step towards more strict regulations in the future.
Thank you. Elad.
Yes, so actually, SAMUKI, we also focus the more general certification. Again, we are also doing the ISO, also for security and privacy, and also the SOC 2. But we're looking also more different certificates for governmental agencies. Actually, today, even without the specific government certification, we do working with varieties of government agencies worldwide in different places, both in APAC and both in the US.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got a question for you as well, Elad, which is, are you concerned that cyber criminals will detect sort of the activity of Cyber6 skill and sort of move to different platforms? What's the best way of managing that?
Yeah, so first, actually, we're building our system to be undetectable. So when of course, we collect and monitor different illicit sources, we make sure we're undetectable. But with that, of course, also, we're not the only player in that playground, as we've seen. Also, there is a lot of law enforcement. And because of that, actually, the cyber criminal operate in different platforms. And we at Cyber6 also follow the trend. So whenever the cyber criminal is moving, we also follow that and collect the data. And also need to remember that the Nate, sometimes even the cyber criminal cannot move easily from one place to another because they build some community. There is some communities, some marketplaces that well established, so it's not easy to move.
Fantastic. So it's almost like they've got their customer base that they're selling to, I guess. And so if they shift, they lose all that reputation and sort of that customer base as well.
Exactly.
I've got a question for you, Yuki, from Michael. Would a secure machine such as Hysolate or that kind of what you're creating as a secure sort of environment, would you still need an EDR client within Hysolate, or is the protection that Hysolate providing enough?
So again, it's an excellent question. What we actually don't limit the users, so users can use whatever they need within a secure environment. However, it's a very correct observation that by focusing on one kind of risk profile in the secure environment, it eliminates the need to protect yourself from malware in this environment. Since if you're accessing your banking system, let's say the risk that this banking system would introduce malware into your secure environment is low. And this is why most of our customers do not use any security software in their secure part in the Hysolate workspace.
If the Hysolate secure space was, for example, communicating, I guess, to an environment that was a little bit risky, would you recommend having something from that perspective, or is it still enough for Hysolate to sort of protect the bubble that it's protecting?
Right. So I think I would say Hysolate can only provide security if let's say if the policy is defined correctly, right? So if you're using Hysolate and you're accessing risky resources and secure resources from the same environment, then you're not actually using Hysolate. So the first part is you have to design the architecture, the access architecture in the correct way in order to benefit from Hysolate. Second, if you do have, for example, if you're using multiple SaaS applications and you are concerned about, let's say that you have Salesforce and you have an HR system, both are being used from the sensitive environment, then you might want to introduce some kind of monitoring in order to make sure to get a second level of security in your isolate workspace.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a question from Lee as well for you, Yuki, around the Isolate Admin Cloud Console and whether that's located sort of in Australia or plans to have one in Australia for, I guess some customers might need to have sort of, sovereign-based rules. Are there plans for Isolate to have sort of multiple cloud-based locations to meet that sovereignty capability?
So today we're operating from a single cloud location, but the architecture that we've built is portable, and we did assess and also let's say emulate the ability to create a cloud instance that would be geographically located in a different place, and based on needs that customers would introduce to us, we'll be able to deploy the cloud instance in Australia or wherever is required from a regulatory perspective.
Fantastic, thank you. Elad, I've got a question for you. The dark web stats that you showed in terms of what's communicated or transmitted and shared sort of in a minute was fascinating. How have you seen that change, or the level of exchange sort of change, particularly sort of during the pandemic period? Has it been sort of a rapid exponential increase? Obviously, as more and more sort of data becomes available, there will be natural increase, but have you seen anything sort of different as a result of sort of the pandemic and people working from home?
Yes, so definitely we've seen there is no more data, but there is there is more new attacks happen. Of course, more attacking about Zoom related vulnerabilities. We see leak data from Slack and other channels that and tools that using more leveraging when we are working from home. And we see also some stuff related to the COVID, or also again it could be in the underground, could be medicine and other stuff that are available out there.
Thank you. Are you seeing any sort of trends or changes, I guess, to new locations or new sites outside of, I guess, the normal sort of places that these criminals are exchanging information? Have you got any sort of thoughts around, other mechanisms that they might be using in the future that, they're not currently using in bulk today, but you can see a general trend of people sort of moving to other platforms?
Again, basically, when in that sense, when the trend is to look again, always to look for new weaknesses and new places that way they can attack and gain access easily, basically. So the cybercrime again monitor the situation, and if there is a way to to grab their hand in different places and able to gain from the attack, then they will leverage that.
Thank you. Yuki, I've got another question for you, which is what makes Isolate more resilient to attack than a standard operating system?
So I think one of the main things that we've added to the product in order to make it resilient is the fact that we're using what is called a non-persistent operating system, which means that even if attacked and having a compromise on the operating system, once you restart the machine, it starts as a clean slate and no threat can persist. Other than that, we've added a number of additional technologies that help protect the environment from attackers. For example, we have disk encryption applied across all data. We have key logging protection, screenshot protections. We can add a watermark in order to control the leakage of data. Other controls such as controlling the clipboard, the ability to copy stuff across environments is controllable by administrators who are controlling the network access, right? So in a sense, it's, I would say, all security is self-contained within Isolate, and it provides you with the ability to control the risk profile of your users.
Excellent, thank you. And I think, is that where you see it's particularly sort of different from a VDI or sort of a virtual desktop as a service sort of application, the levels of granularity, I can't say the word, granularity of cybersecurity controls that you've integrated into the product?
So I think typically, if you look at VDI, while it's used as a security product at times, it's actually designed for productivity. So conceptually, it's a separate operating system. However, all the controls that I've just mentioned, the abilities to control the transfer of data, to protect from key logging and from screenshotting, not necessarily they exist in a VDI environment. One thing to mention about VDI, and this might be the main difference, is the complexity and cost on one hand of creating a VDI deployment, and on the other hand, the need to have a very powerful network connection in order to be able to gain good user experience with VDI, and the inability to work offline. So those are maybe the two differences from a technology perspective from VDI or desktop as a service.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm going to throw in a question around sort of predictions for 2022 and sort of what both of you sort of see as the big threats that CISOs or even board directors should be considering coming down the pipeline. There's increases in ransomware, obviously, and things like that. And then the whole concept of zero trust, which seems to be, I don't know whether it's a little bit of a fad in terms of the way that it's being implemented at the moment, similar to, defense in depth that we used to have in the past, because zero trust is a little bit at the minute really least privilege access, rather than sort of people thinking of it as a whole new architectural framework. Really keen to hear from both of you in terms of, what you think are some of the challenges for CISOs coming up over the next 12 months and beyond. Elad, did you want to start us off, because you've got such a rich sort of data pool of information from all the things that you're seeing across the dark web?
Yes, so definitely we year over year we see increase. Okay, and as you mentioned, actually, I think one of the biggest and trending that we see increase is the ransomware attack. There is now we've seen a lot of groups, many groups pop up, and conduct a ransomware attack, lock the system of the victim, take the data, extract the data from the organization, ask the ransomware, and then if you are not paying, they start leaking the data. This is a trend that we see and we see increasing in different groups, ransomware groups that every time, and we hear it also in the news, and we see it also when we monitor our sources in the deep and dark web. So this is again one of the major, and of course because of the COVID, the other aspect is again weaknesses in the environment when you are working from home using different Wi-Fi and internet and other different tools, Zoom and others that you are working from home. Sometimes actually we've seen people working from the home computer that is also sometimes vulnerable, so not aware that they can be monitoring if their home computer is compromised.
Excellent, thank you. Yuki, your thoughts on the future and the threats that companies and boards should be really sort of thinking about?
Right. So I will not risk predicting how threats evolve. This is definitely a lad's domain. But I'll talk a little bit about, let's say, the needs and the technology trends that we're seeing. So I think that a couple of things that go hand in hand. First is what we've seen over the past couple of years, the transition to remote work and to hybrid work will continue to prevail. And while most organizations have adapted to this one way or the other. This process of adaptation and making it more streamlined would continue over the next 12 months, that's for sure. And I think that there are many technologies, specifically zero trust that I've mentioned, that would continue to gain momentum and evolve and be introduced across many more organizations, add additional layers that would make them more prevalent and more easy to use. This is something that I think that we'll see over the next year or so.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think for our audience, it's focus on ransomware. That's a key trend going to increase, and the way that they're leaking information and extorting payments is going to change, and then also to continue on that zero trust journey as tools and systems mature to sort of provide more than just least privilege access. I think thank you, Elad and Yuki. That's absolutely fantastic session in terms of the products and services that you offer and your insights. Paul, I'm going to hand back to you, and I think the audience in Australia would love to hear a little bit more about the Israeli startup ecosystem and what makes it so different to other places in the world, particularly Australia. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Damien. Just a bit more before I do a formal thanks. The ecosystem, as I said before, is a very fast-growing, ecosystem with an amazing venture capital industry, and really any industry that's got tech, Israel's going to be have a real role to play globally. But on the cultural side, there's lots of really interesting things that make up the magic of why Israel was so unique from an innovation perspective. So there's things like celebrating success, where if someone has an excerpt that's going to be front page of the AFR of Israel, celebrating that exit. We've got also the approach of the investor community to failures, because this is a very risky industry. And what is the approach of your investor community to failures? And you'll find that when you talk to the venture capital industry, that there's an acceptance to failure and an attitude of getting on. Obviously, if there's been nothing untoward, that's the case. There's the flight to engineering. Where do your best year 12 students go to study? As we know, there's mandatory army service in Israel, and our biggest unit in the army is A200, which is the cyber unit. And so, Damien, there's two parts of the ecosystem. There's the technology infrastructure side, and then the cultural side. And we do, as a chamber, a lot to try and bring those two things together. And together with ASA, we're really hoping we can bridge the gap between the two countries and strengthen those ties. So I just want to thank our presenters, Elad from Cyber6Gil and Yuki from Isolate. As we saw from the numerous questions, you really brought to life your unique and important solutions. Special thanks to Asa and Damien. You made it run very smoothly. Thank you to our audience. We'll be emailing you all the presentations, contact details of our speakers, and also a link to the recording. Otherwise, I wish all those in Australia a safe and enjoyable summer, and encourage you all to contact your local chamber and find out about our series of trade delegations to Israel, which we're hoping to renew in 2022. So on that, I'll just say thank you and shalom.
Thank you, everybody.